Welcome, Jodi. It's lovely to meet you.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
Uh, Dr. Jodi Richardson is an anxiety educator, speaker, and author. She's written Anxious Kids, which you co-wrote with Michael Gross, I believe.
Correct.
And more recently, for mums, Anxious Mums, how mums can turn anxiety into strength, which as a mum, I know I can certainly relate to that. When I'm feeling anxious, the kids are the first people to pick up that energy and react accordingly. So I can see that's a valuable asset into a family's household. Jodi, can you tell me how did this come about? Your background is in dealing with children's anxiety, isn't it?
Yeah, so my interest in anxiety really stems from my own personal experience with anxiety, but also as an academic, a former academic, and and educator, I really felt that the more I learned about anxiety, the more important it was to share what I was learning because there was still a lot of unknowns. There was still, a lot of stigma around anxiety. Beyond Blue have done amazing work, and I did work for Beyond Blue many years ago myself. And it's just about, the more we can open up and talk about our own journeys, the more we encourage other people to do the same and normalize the experience because it is very, very common. But in answer to your question about this particular book, Anxious Mums came about after I was speaking at an event, actually, and it just so happened that one of the mums in the audience that day is a colleague of my publisher who published Anxious Kids. And after hearing me speak and being so open about my own journey with my own anxiety and mental health and medication, she contacted my publisher and said, Jodi has to write a book. All mums have to hear what Jodi has to say. And so it was really quite amazing that that was really what sparked the discussions about this book. And I obviously jumped at it because it's something I'm very passionate about.
So Jodi, I read that you started experiencing anxiety at the age of 4, and is this something that has carried through for you into adulthood? And
Yes.
what have been ways that you've tried to combat it? Medications, counselling, I imagine, that type of thing.
Yes, yes. So my first symptoms were when I was in prep. I had an upset tummy each day. I was in a prep class with 52 other kids and 2 teachers. So you can only imagine what that must have been like. It was obviously very stressful for my teachers, and there was a lot of yelling. That it wasn't a very relaxing, peaceful environment, and it obviously triggered anxiety in me. I have a genetic predisposition towards it. It runs in my family. And then it wasn't until 20 years later, the death of a family member actually triggered a major clinical depression in me. And that's when I went to get help. And it was as I was getting treated for the depression and I eventually found an amazing psychologist who I write about a lot in the book, that it was recognised that I had undiagnosed anxiety, whereas I didn't really know that what I'd experienced all my life up to that point had been any sort of a disorder. That was just my temperament, my personality. So, yeah, definitely a lot of many, many years seeing my psychologist. I was on medication for depression, but as I started to get better, I weaned off that and was off medication for a very, very long time. And I managed my anxiety with exercise, with meditation, until I became a parent when meditation was impossible. And ultimately, when I became a mum and all of the extra uncertainty and responsibility and lack of sleep, my mental health really declined to a point where I ended up deciding to take medication, which was really life changing. When we had our our eldest, my first, Hunter, he had a tongue tie, so it turned out, but breastfeeding was obviously really difficult until that was diagnosed, and just my efforts at really trying to breastfeed him were very extreme. I ended up doing supply line feeding with him, and that's really exhausting. You don't really get much of a break in between the feed and the sterilisation, and he needed to be woken for a period of time to be fed to because he just wasn't putting on weight. And there was just a likelihood of me having more trouble with my mental health because of my previous history, combined with all of the challenges of being a new parent and having complications in terms of feeding and sleeping and the like. And so it was a bit of a perfect storm.
Does a lack of sleep trigger anxiety? Is there a relationship there?
Yes, there is. Yes, sleep affects our mood in profound ways, and it's something that we don't have very much control over. Particularly as new parents. Once our kids are older and sleeping through, it's quite extraordinary the difference it makes. We just kind of get used to operating on a lot less sleep, and it doesn't serve us well in terms of our mental health, particularly if there's been challenges in the past or a pre-existing disorder.
So, I mean, anxiety, depression is something that I personally believe is quite widely discussed now and acknowledged. Anxiety as a disorder, I seem to, you don't hear much about it. You might think someone's an anxious person, but as a recognised disorder. So what are some of the symptoms and signs, and how do we know whether it's just normal life or whether we've actually got a problem that is inhibiting us in our daily lives?
Yeah, so normal anxiety, everybody experiences. It's a normal human emotion, and it settles down after a stressful event has passed. Except for COVID, where that's just an ongoing stressful and uncertain event. That's been a challenge. So that's infrequent. Normal anxiety is infrequent and settles down. But when we have a disorder, those of us with a disorder, when anxiety is becoming a problem, we can have incessant worry and avoidance that comes with the anxiety of not wanting to participate or attend a function or try something new or step up in a work role. Or avoidance is a really big challenge with anxiety and something to look for. When the anxiety is becoming really frequent on more days than not, and that's going over a number of weeks, and that anxiety response comes with a lot of physical experiences like a racing heart, sometimes trembling, a sick stomach, various other challenges like frequent perspiration and dizziness that can come with the changes in our breathing that can imbalance the oxygen and carbon dioxide. Right. And so what I always like to say is that if you think your anxiety might be a problem, that's absolutely the time to go and make an appointment to see your GP and ask the question.
Mm-hmm. So how prevalent is it as a problem with mothers in the population? And has it changed over time?
It is definitely a problem. 1 in 4 people in a lifetime, men and women, will experience an anxiety disorder on average in their lifetime. So that's really common. For women, it's around 16% or 1 in 7 generally, but the likelihood increases in the postpartum period. The likelihood of depression also increases. It's a time of a lot of change. Obviously, we have a lot of hormone changes over that time, changes in estrogen levels and progesterone as well. And
is it more common in women than men?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's twice as common in women as it is in men. Still equally debilitating for men, and men can have challenges with their anxiety, particularly becoming new parents as well, or parents of teenagers. So I'm told, we're not quite there yet. But it is much more common in women than men, yes.
Do you know why that is, Jodi?
Yes, there's a lot of research into it. Some of the research points to just the idea of us processing stress differently in the brain in terms of the function and structure of the brain. That women, we have the hormonal differences, in terms of the estrogen and progesterone and the changes of that over the month, as well as, at key points in our, reproductive lives through having children and menopause and the like. Testosterone is said to be somewhat protective against anxiety. We as women tend to have different coping mechanisms. They're just some of the reasons why it's thought women suffer more with anxiety than men do.
Are there different periods in our life where it typically becomes more common, such as when we have children? That's one stage of life. Are there other, if there's a traumatic event or something like that, is quite an obvious thing. But are there actual life ages, but maybe just to be aware of as a mother, when our children perhaps enter adolescence or 20s, or, I mean, are there recognised timeframes?
Yeah, different. Yeah, there's really a lot of really good research around when different types of anxieties can come on. So for parents, it's really important to know that half of all mental illness comes on by around the age of 14.
Wow,
Yeah, which it's
that's
extraordinary.
amazing.
Yeah, and so most adults who have anxiety can track it back to when they were teenagers or children. And sometimes at my presentations, I'll be there talking to parents about their children's anxiety and have a parent come up at the end, or more than one, and say, "You have just described my life I never knew. This is what I've been going through." 75% of all mental illness comes on by about the age of 25. So, yeah, it's definitely, 1 in 7 children have a diagnosed mental illness, and half of those have anxiety.
So
It's
when you say
really
children, what age are you talking there, Jodi? The 1 in 7.
4 to 17 years old.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Like goosebumps.
really
That's so high. It's
so high,
bothering.
and we know that before COVID, that anxiety, these are pre-COVID statistics.
Yes,
The
yes.
research, the research is underway on a grand scale around the world, following people's mental health and how they're tracking. Early research coming out of Monash has shown significant increases in adults in depression and anxiety.
Really,
And
really.
not so long ago, there was research showing that even children between 1 and 5 were experiencing more anxiety.
I'm back to talking about, uh, by 14, half of mental illness is already established. What are ways that, as parents, we can look for those signs, as it manifests?
Lots of worry, which is a tricky one if kids aren't talking to you because that's internal. But also, avoidance is a really hallmark sign of anxiety. Naturally, when the anxiety response kicks in, it's a fight or flight response. It's a protective response, but it can make us feel pretty awful. And the natural outcome of that is not wanting to go. I don't want to do it. I don't want to participate. I don't want to deliver that oral presentation in class. I don't want to go to camp. And so watching out for avoidance, big emotions as well, because the part of the brain that's, I like to say, is like the smoke alarm for it's like our threat detector. That part of the brain is also part of the emotional center of the brain. So if children are, really teary or more angry than usual, or experiencing a lot of big emotions, really worried, avoidant, and, just can't concentrate, having trouble remembering things. These are some of the ways that you can pick up on anxiety in children, difficulty sleeping, that sort of thing as well.
And how do we deal with that? Whether it's if it's something that we perceive as being quite a rational thing. I mean, being afraid of new things sometimes is there to face your fear and do it anyway. Come on, just get it done. And once you realise it's not such a big scary monster, you'll feel better. Push you down the water slide. You get to the end, have fun, and go, oh, it wasn't so bad. Or do we hold back and go, okay, you're afraid, I'm not going to. Let's just forget the water slide altogether. I mean, what are some of the ways that as parents we can deal with supporting them in their fears?
Yes, it's an age-old question, because it's how much do we push and when do we hold back, and I think as parents we're constantly answering that question, aren't we? And we don't always get it right. But the thing about avoidance is it only makes anxiety worse. So for the child that is anxious about going to school, the more they stay home, the harder it will be to front up on another day. And so the idea is to help kids move in the direction of what they need to do, but sometimes we need to nudge them forward in small steps, and that's a technique called step laddering. So it's about making a step in that direction. So for the child that's I mean there are a lot of children who have phobias, and if a child has a phobia of dogs, for example, which is reasonably common amongst the phobias, is it might be just starting by looking at a picture of a dog, or it could be, going out and having a look at a dog from a distance, and it's just like step by step by step, and increasing the the challenge. But you can create those kinds of step ladders with the children's input as well. But I'll tell you a quick story. Often moving kids in the direction of what's important helps when it's really meaningful. And actually, my mum, I talk a lot about my mum's anxiety as well. And
you said it sort of ran in the family, so that was your direct line, was through your mother, was it, Jodi?
Yeah, very much so. So she was very anxious when I was growing up. Yeah, so definitely mum, and driving a long distance in a car alone has been something that's been difficult for mum. And the other day, a long time friend of hers, her friend's mother had passed away. So she had to drive many, many hours to a funeral. And it's the first time she's done it. She's 70-something, 73, she wouldn't mind me saying. And in pursuit of something really meaningful, like supporting her, her longtime friend at the funeral, that was what helped her to sort of, take that step and move in the direction of something that made her really anxious. Yes. So sometimes with a step ladder, if we can help sort of bring some real meaning to the steps forward for kids, that can really help them to have that willingness to tolerate the discomfort and to be able to sort of move along towards what they really need and want to do.
And you have a fantastic resource on your website, I noticed, a free template for people to download and how to action that. And that's on Jodi's website, Dr Jodi Richardson, Jodi with an I, drjodirichardson.com.au. There was a fantastic template there I saw, and I thought about it with my daughter, who I wouldn't have thought she has an anxiety issue, but she's in year 6 and never puts up her hand, apparently, ever, and it's a little bit frustrating because she's got a lot to contribute, certainly at home, that's for sure. And I was sort of thinking, okay, well, how would you, I think that probably is an anxiety-related thing, or a fear of being seen, or shyness. So I sort of thought that would be interesting to use that template, but then also go, what would be the long-term goal? I mean, Jodi, in that situation, would that be something that I could apply, or would it only be for more serious types of things?
Oh, you can apply that strategy for anything, and sometimes we need to be a little bit creative. And so certainly children that don't feel comfortable speaking in front of the class, sometimes it's shyness and it's a temperament issue, and other times it can be related to a social anxiety where there's that real fear of being harshly judged or embarrassing yourself. And so some of the ways to one way to start might be having her work just in a pair and sharing comfortably in a pair with someone she's really comfortable with, and then in a pair with someone she doesn't know quite as well. And it's just about sort of raising the stakes little by little. And I guess not knowing her and knowing what her what's important to her and what she's passionate about, but hopefully if you can find sort of something that's in the near future that might be really important for her to have that skill of being able to speak up, that might help her sort of be more willing to take the steps in that direction. And I always say, come up with a plan with the child if you possibly can, if they're old enough, and also come up with some lovely rewards along the way, some social rewards. So it might be some one-on-one time with a parent, or going and getting a milkshake together after school one afternoon, or doing something special that sort of rewards that courageous behaviour.
Is there a link with shyness and anxiety? Or
yes.
Personality types, if not shyness, sensitivity, or are there any sort of factors that we look for with certain types of people?
Yeah, certainly shyness as part of a temperament can predict anxiety, not necessarily, but there was some research done out of Canada that showed that if you had a child in kindergarten, for example, and you answered to 2 questions. Is your child more shy than other children their age? And you answered yes. Does your child worry more than other children their age? If you answer yes to both those questions, that can point towards anxiety possibly being something that might be a challenge for them. So temperament does play a role, yes.
Something very interesting I read that you had said. Anxiety is the leading cause of ill health and death in Australian girls and women aged 5 to 44, affecting 1 in 3 women in Australia over a lifetime. Globally, women are nearly twice as likely as men to develop an anxiety disorder, and it's more disabling in women than men.
Very much so, yes. So 1 in 3 women, 1 in 5 men in a lifetime, and yeah, it's more disabling in that it impacts our lives in different ways to men, and can challenge, particularly I think because we are usually the main carers, not always. Certainly, there's lots of dads who are stay-at-home dads and looking after the children, but predominantly that's what women tend to do, and it can impact us in lots of ways, and it can impact our experience of parenting, in terms of how present we can be with our children, how relaxed, how playful, and also what we remember of those years as well. I know I look back on my own parenting journey, and there's so much I don't remember because my mind wasn't where I would have liked it to be. It was always future focused and worrying about, what's going to go wrong, or, is that rash something that's going to amount to, a visit to the hospital, or, so yeah, it is. It's a huge challenge, but thankfully it is something that is treatable and manageable, once we are, on a pathway to seeking help.
And so what are some of the ways that we can manage anxiety? Obviously getting professional help, but are there ways that we can do it ourselves?
Yeah, very much so. So really what's happening when we're anxious is a threat has been detected by our brain, a part of our brain called the amygdala. And one of the strategies that's very powerful for managing anxiety, but not always easy to do depending on the age of your children, is regular meditation. What meditation does is it brings our attention to the present. So we're paying attention to what's happening in the moment.
Which is an extension of that.
Yes, that's right. And so meditation is more that sort of seated, formal practice of focusing on the breath. And what we know that will do over time is reduce the size and sensitivity of the amygdala. So it's less sensitive to threat, which reduces anxiety over the long term. Mindfulness is, you're exactly right. That's similar in that we're paying attention to the present moment, but we can be doing anything. And so we can be really mindful about changing a nappy. We can be really mindful about reading a book to our children, or playing a game, or having a conversation, or hanging out the washing. And, what we know without question is that just the average person, that our minds wander around nearly 50% of the time. It's actually 47% of the time. When we can bring our attention back to the present, we're much more likely to be able to settle our anxiety, and be happier as well. Breathing, deliberate breathing with a focus equally on the exhalation as the inhalation, is also very calming to an anxious brain, and that's the relaxation response, which was first identified through Harvard researchers. And another strategy that won't be a surprise to your listeners and followers is exercise. And the thing about the fight or flight response is we're being completely powered up to fight physically to save our lives, or to flee. When we move, it's the natural end to the fight or flight response. Not only that, when we exercise, we release serotonin, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter. And among many others, we release, and this is a mouthful, GABA aminobutyric acid. And
Right.
yes, that actually, gamma aminobutyric acid, I should say.
Yeah.
And that is a neurotransmitter that puts the brakes on our anxiety response. So it helps to calm us down. So exercise is something that I've used my whole life to manage my anxiety, even before I knew I had anxiety.
Right. And do you think now, upon reflection, that was why you were so attracted to exercise, Jodi? Is that you were getting a natural release that you needed?
I would say so. I've always exercised, yes. Even now, I mean, I took up karate when I was 40. And so even now, CrossFit, karate, walks every week. And yeah, I do. I think naturally I was just managing my mental health and well-being without really understanding what I was doing and why, but that I just knew it really made me feel good. And so it was self-fulfilling in that way.
Sometimes I find that, unfortunately, I'm not blessed as you are. For me, exercise is something that is very much a conscious effort. But what I find is it's often when I feel like it the least is when I need it the most.
Yes.
It's all right when I'm feeling good to be wanting to meditate, not meditate as well, and exercise, but it's often actually when I really need it is when I don't feel like it.
Yes. Oh, look, and it's hard, and you are not alone in that, Kate. You're not alone. And one of the things and I've done a lot of work in the field of exercise physiology, working with clients who I'm using exercise to help them with their own mental health and physical health as well. And what I can 100% tell you is that it's best not to wait till we feel motivated. That it's
like
important.
The dishes.
Yes, that's right.
Dinner often.
Yes, no, I know. Yeah, exactly. If we once we get into the habit of it, the benefits are self-fulfilling. But don't wait to feel motivated. The actual motivation will come once you get into the routine of it,
Right.
and it's so powerful for anxiety. And I couldn't recommend it more highly. But yeah, do it whether you feel like it or not, and you'll get the benefits.
Yes.
You were saying before about about anxiety and how easy it is to talk about it, and I think it's having that language around it and knowing that difference between the sort of the normal variety and having the confidence to be able to raise our kids talking about all feelings, anxiety being one of them, letting kids know that that this is the response of our brain to threat. And I just think it's so important our kids have an understanding. They learn about their heart and lungs and blood and skin. My 12-year-old knows skin is the largest organ. Well, he knows about the brain and anxiety too,
Right.
but it's because he's got me as a mum. I think, if we can all teach our kids, because we all have stress in our lives and we all have challenges, and our kids will be no different. So the more they can learn about their brain and what happens with their body when they become anxious and what to do about it, the more I think that, generations to come will be able to really manage better and seek help earlier as well.
I read some of your work that said one way to help our children dealing with anxiety was to actually model when we're dealing with it, perhaps how we're feeling or what we're going to do about it. Would you like to talk about that, Jodi?
Yes, so Michael and I wrote about coping out loud in anxious kids, and it's a way for us as parents. Our kids are watching what we're doing, and they're learning very much from what we do, probably more from than what we say. So it's true, isn't it? And sometimes we sort of see that.
I do. Maybe the other way around.
Yeah, that's right. And so like me, for example, and I think, I'm not the norm because I'm very, very open about my mental health, but I think if we can all, we all have ups and downs, and, for any parent to be able to come home from, a bit of a shocker of a day at work or something, and to be able to say, oh, I'm really stressed about something that happened today. You don't even need to give the details, and just say, I'm really feeling stressed, and gosh, when I feel like this, I find it hard to concentrate. And do you know what I think I need to do? I think I'm just going to take the dog for it, because I know that will, help me to sort of manage my stress. And it's just like, okay, you're labeling what you're experiencing, you're normalising it for kids, and then you're giving them a solution, and you're not lecturing, you're not teaching. They're just going, okay, so when they feel stress, they've already got this experience, and they've seen that, and they might see dad do that when he comes home, and mum might say, oh my gosh, I'm so frustrated about this delivery that didn't come, and I've been waiting, and I set aside all this time, and so frustrated. I don't know what to, what am I going to do? Okay, well, do you know what I think is going to help? I think I'm just going to need to just take a little bit of time out and take some deep breaths, and or whatever the strategy is for you. In our house, we have some focus mitts because, two of us do karate. So sometimes when, particularly, we've got a 12-year-old son, if he's feeling stressed, he'll say, right, he'll give me the mat, the pads, and, we've got to find healthy ways to express how we're feeling, but also role model those for our kids, because that's how they're going to learn to manage, and also to know that what they're going through life is completely normal, and they're not alone, and that there are strategies they can put into place.
And also perhaps that it's that our mood or the way that we're acting isn't necessarily a reflection on them, because it can come across that way if they're a little bit agitated or not present or not in a particularly good mood or not feeling particularly open, ready to sit down and talk because you're busy and thinking about something else and cooking dinner. If you can actually verbalize what's going on, okay, well, it's something to do with work and that's why I'm feeling like this, not because you're irritating me. Because it's very easy to internalize someone's reactions towards you, particularly possibly with children, because their whole world revolves around them, doesn't it? Everything is a reflection of them.
You are spot on, and it's very easy. And I think even those of us with anxiety, when somebody around us isn't happy, or we can take that on board as well. I know I do, and I will say to my kids, I'm feeling anxious right now, and so you'll notice I'm actually feeling a little bit like irritable, or I'm not very patient at the moment. So it might be best if I just have the room to myself for a little while. It's nothing to do with you. This is, something I'm experiencing. And I've done that since I've been quite young. And I do think, sometimes just to have that acknowledgement that, perhaps my mood is something my child is taking responsibility for, just to sort of verbalize it and say, I'm having a hard time with something. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I need a little bit of time. It's nothing to do with you. I'm sorry if I was a little bit, short with you, or if my tone doesn't sound like it normally would. I'm struggling a little bit right now. So this is what I need. I need some time out, or to do something to look after myself. I think that's a really great point that you've raised about that.
Because it is easy to see others' behaviour as a reflection of us. And it makes me wonder if that's perhaps why women are so susceptible to anxiety, because we are naturally empathetic and sensitive, and when you're like that, you do pick up other people's emotions and affects you quite strongly.
It does, and for many women, that the facial expressions, or and it could be just that somebody's having a really bad day, somebody that you work with, and then you can internalize that exactly, and that sounds that alarm in our brain that sets off this anxiety response, and that's because an anxious response is the same whether the threat is real or imagined or even perceived. And it's easy sometimes, for us to sometimes have our anxiety triggered, and we won't necessarily even consciously realize what has been detected, what has been taken in by the amygdala, because it takes in information from our environment, from what we see, from what we hear. And so sometimes it can be triggered and we don't even know what's triggered it, and then we have all of this sort of anxiety that builds and shows itself, and
the thoughts too, trying to work out where the source is coming from.
Yes.
Which obviously, I imagine, makes it worse.
It can do. Yeah. And I'll often say, I remember ringing a parent line when one of the kids was just crying, and I rang in tears, sleep deprived, worried mum, and she said, you know what, it actually doesn't matter why, because you're going to do the same thing anyway. And I'm like, I want to know why. But she said, doesn't matter. You're going to do check the nappy, all of the basic stuff, and then sometimes they just cry, and it's the same with the anxiety. We won't always know what's triggered it, but we still put the same strategies into practice.
So Jodi, is there anything you'd like to talk about as far as mothers, how we identify whether we are suffering anxiety, or our children, or any thoughts you'd like to share that we should be aware of?
Yes, thank you, Kate. Look, I'd love to say that any time that you think anxiety might be a problem, that's the time to go and ask the GP, because sometimes we get that reassurance from the GP that, this is just developmental. I mean, it is developmental for children to be fearful of new people and strangers, and it is developmental for kids to have separation anxiety, but there's a point at which it's no longer part of the developmental phase. So lots of parents will go and ask the question about their kids and get the reassurance that, no, this is completely normal. And other parents will, have the GP maybe say, look, maybe this is something that, we need to get some extra help for. And that's okay too, because whether you're getting the help or not, the problem is still there. And so the sooner that kids are getting the help they need, the better. And it's the same with us as mums that, I think it's easy, with everything that we do. And, the research shows this, it plays out that we do more in terms of what is needed at home compared to men, and more of the care of our children, and many more women working out of home.
And more single mums such as myself as well.
Many.
My ex-husband does have the children, but when I have them, I have it all going on, as he does.
Yes.
More and more to take on.
Absolutely. That's the thing. And that's when there isn't that sort of pass the baton and, take a time out. It's just you've got to keep going. And so, yeah, definitely, I think for some women, it's just the norm. That's just life. I'm just busy. I'm just overwhelmed. But, when there's a lot of worry, or you're starting to not wanting to participate or see friends or do the normal things that you would do, and, you feeling anxious and edgy and
or
irritable.
Appetite affected, I imagine that would be an obvious sign to look out.
Did you say feeling?
Appetite affected?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting when the adrenaline comes in, the appetite is dropped. We don't, when we're really, really highly anxious at the start, we don't want to eat. But then when the cortisol, another stress hormone, starts to kick in, if the anxiety response is prolonged, that's when we want to eat everything that we possibly can get our hands on. So it's important to sort of look for both. And yeah, and also just, there's no harm in ever going and asking the question, because, the gap between first symptoms of anxiety and help seeking is still 8 years in Australia. It's 8 years in urban parts of our country. It's 18 in rural.
Wow.
And
it's a very isolating experience if you're not getting help or sharing it.
Very, very. And, and it is a treatable condition. And there's so much that can be done. So, and I'd also like to add that when it comes to getting the help of a psychologist, that, for me, it was my third psychologist who was the right fit for me. And so I really would encourage anyone listening and watching that, if the psychologist that you were referred to doesn't feel like the right fit, then they're not. And it's time to, go back to your GP and ask for another referral. And because having the right professional that you're talking to and having a good relationship with them is really important for the therapeutic relationship. So,
right. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Jodi?
Yeah, I just really like to say that, anxiety isn't something that we need to get rid of to really be able to thrive and to be able to do what we need to do and what's important to us. So I really encourage anyone to recognise that there are lots of ways to dial it back. I think it's very easy for us to wait until we feel 100% all the ducks in a row and really calm, confident, relaxed and optimistic when we might take new chances or take a risk or start something new, like you 11 years ago, starting this amazing business for the greater good of the community. And doing anything meaningful is hard. And so don't wait till your anxiety is gone, because you might be waiting a long time. Turn it down, use the skills, learn the skills to sort of move it off center stage. But sometimes the anxiety just has to come along for the ride. And, if we're doing something meaningful, we can keep moving in that direction, even if anxiety sort of has to hum along in the background.
Or before it gets worse, because on that note, something I would like to share from a personal point of view, when I started Offspring Magazine 11 years ago, was when my daughter was 16 months old, and I'd had developed terrible sleep because she was a nighttime waker. She woke, consistently through the night as a baby, and I breastfed her till she was 2. So I think that there was a lot of sleeplessness, but that combined with the stress of working, which is very much a modern experience for women, working and having young children. That's not uncommon, but I didn't deal with the anxiety, which I look back now and think I had an anxiety disorder. It manifested into chronic insomnia, I believe, as part of the but I didn't realise that that's what it was. And now I look back, then it took 9 years to deal with that. Medication, psychologists, the Vipassana meditation retreat actually was the final thing that actually really helped a lot, but meditation did help along the way. But I'd tried everything by that stage to really get it. But I look back and think, if I had recognised very early on that it was anxiety and found ways to deal with it, the sleep wouldn't have suffered, and then, you know, the fallout of that. So it is definitely something that to know it's treatable is really helpful, Jodi.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kate. It really is. And it's that vicious cycle of anxiety interrupts sleep. The less sleep you have, the more anxious you feel, and it's a snowball effect. And, you know, seeking help is a win-win. There's nothing to lose. And the sooner the better. Don't wait, especially because services are stretched when it comes to psychological services at the moment because of COVID. So the sooner that you can seek the help and find a psychologist and start, you know, moving in direction of managing it and learning how to you know, get it out of your way, the better. It's and
I imagine there's probably lots of accessible means too via Zoom and things like that as well to help people. So.
Yes, absolutely, and counsellors as well. You know, we can't dismiss the contribution. There are some amazing counsellors. If you're looking for some help, ask around. It's a really nice thing to do, is just to, you know, ask around some people that you trust, because often word of mouth recommendations for something personal like finding somebody good to talk to are really helpful.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, Jodi. Jodi's book, Anxious Mums, How Mums Can Turn Their Anxiety into Strength. And it's also available on Audible, which is great to know too. I've downloaded a lot of books on Audible for people who prefer the oral experience of a book rather than reading, or have more time. I sometimes find it's good, you know, being busy with kids or washing and things like that. I can be listening at the same time, whereas having time to sit down and read a book is sometimes more challenging. So thank you for your time, Jodi. It looks like it's a great book from what I've looked at, and I'll certainly be looking more into it.
Thank you very much for having me, Kate. It's been a pleasure.